Okay, everybody, welcome back for APES Topic 2.2, Ecosystem Services. So what we're going to be looking at is the importance of ecosystems and how they have structure and diversity that can change over time, and that they provide ecosystem services in terms of what they're able to do for humans and also non-humans. And we categorize them into provisioning for services, provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting. Now, we see the term anthropogenic. That means anything related to humans. So, anthropogenic activities is anything that humans are doing. Anthropogenic activities can disrupt ecosystem services, potentially resulting in economic and ecological consequences. Now, ecosystem services are processes by which life supporting resources such as clean water, timber, fisheries, and agricultural crops are produced. Intrinsic value. This is an important term. This is meaning that living things or nature in general has the value independent of any benefit to humanity. So just because something it doesn't do anything for humans directly or indirectly doesn't mean that it doesn't have value. It has value in its existence of itself. Now, looking at it from another perspective, we can analyze it from direct and indirect benefits. Direct benefits are such as providing the food that we eat or the water we drink. They're the benefits we directly get from these different ecosystems. Indirect would be in the same ballpark, but in a different way, providing a diversity of conditions, nutrients, and species, all of which make the ecosystem healthier for all organisms, including humans. So, by helping other species, it indirectly helps humans. Now, human activities can disrupt ecosystem services with economic and ecological consequences. So, this is looking at it from the perspective of direct and indirect benefits. Now, we're going to be looking at these four categories here: provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting services. Now, when we say the term provisions, you often think of the term probably like rations and goods. Now, provisions are goods produced by ecosystems that humans can directly use: lumber, food crops, medicinal plants, natural rubber, furs. 70% of the top 150 prescription drugs in the United States come from natural sources or chemicals that were derived from natural sources that we've learned to produce on our own, or we continue to grow crops and harvest them. In terms of regulating services, natural ecosystems help to regulate environmental conditions. A classic example that we're talking about a lot this year is carbon. Humans currently add about 8 gigatons, or 1 gigaton, or equals 1 trillion kilograms, of carbon to the atmosphere annually. Only about 4 gigatons remain in the atmosphere because the rest, the other 4 gigatons, are removed by natural ecosystems such as oceans, tropical rainforest, harvested by trees of other species through photosynthesis. Remember, we talked about our sinks, carbon sinks throughout we're doing the carbon cycle. This would be an example of that. Now, as support systems, natural ecosystems provide many different support systems, and it would be extremely costly for humans to try and generate or replicate these different systems that are just there naturally in nature. Humans gain more in agriculture from pollinators. Pollinators live in these natural ecosystems. Losing them would impact food production immensely. We would have to somehow manually pollinate all these different crops that are throughout the world. It'd be a large expenditure of energy, resources, and the cost would be exponential with every year because we, again, have a growing population. So healthy ecosystems filter harmful pathogens and chemicals from water. We talked about this when we were talking about especially wetlands acting as water filtration systems for our freshwater sources. So it produces cleaner drinking water that requires less treatment. A classic example is New York City. New York City does not get its water from the immediate area. It actually gets its water from the Catskill Mountains in reservoirs. Now, residential development and tourism up in the Catskill Mountains has contaminated a lot of these waters with various chemicals that come with increasing traffic from cars, as well as building, as well as silt, which is like a very fine, don't say dirt, very fine material that is easily carried by rainwater down into the reservoir, which can then, over time, disrupt different systems that involve getting the water from one place to another. So, an adequate filtration plant would cost $6 to $8 billion to produce, maintain, and then obviously each year would probably, as it scales up with growing population, would increase the cost. To prevent this from happening, New York City and the EPA have been working to protect sensitive areas of the Catskills that specifically affect these reservoirs. So the reservoirs continue to serve as an important system, and New York City has some of the cleanest tap water in the country. Now, cultural services. This is one that's often underplayed, but is still very important. Ecosystems provide cultural or aesthetic benefits to many people. There's the awe-inspiring beauty of nature. We talked about the intrinsic value. It's a source of education. It's a source of research. Scientists can perform research into natural ecosystems that may have no economic gain, and the research itself has instrumental value in not only just gaining knowledge, but also can influence others and other studies by pointing them in certain directions. For instance, we just were studying a snail shell that was actually able to, again, just random snail, they're actually able to possibly produce a new medicine from a chemical derived from this shell of the snail. So these values can be difficult to quantify because you can't always put a price tag on certain things. Again, there's certain things that have cultural history. That's why many of the national parks were established by Theodore Roosevelt and others, was because it was seen as American heritage, part of our history here in the United States. It gives people a sense of place, a sense of belonging, different aesthetic values. There's the beauty of nature, a way to escape the daily life, being able to go out and do hiking, experience nature, recreation, all these different things, which also drive industry and economics. So those are different cultural services that they can produce. Now, if you want to analyze it from specifically just a monetary, meaning like just from the perspective of how it can make money or how it affects the flow of money, we can do that as well. So economists believe that the instrumental values of ecosystems can be assigned a monetary value, meaning we could quantify exact dollar value how much it's worth. It can be difficult to do because there are many different factors that can go into it. So there's one way that was used to calculate this. So we can analyze it from the replace value, the cost to replace the services provided by the ecosystem. The effect on property values in this location, specifically oceanfront housing or places located close to the shoreline that can be more hit by hurricanes, flooding, erosion, and things like that. How much time and money are people willing to spend on these different services, such as a fee to visit a park or national park? Using these different factors, ecosystems are worth over $125 trillion per year, twice the entire global economy. So they're able to provide all these different services because they're just naturally there, existing, as long as they're not disrupted. Now, biodiversity helps determine the services ecosystems provide. Remember, the more diversity, the healthier the ecosystem will be, and therefore the ecosystem services will also continue to thrive. So a decline in biodiversity, genetic, species, habitat has been shown over and over again, a decline in these ecosystem services. Such as if you look at any like the flooding and hurricanes down in Florida, places that still have their mangrove swamps intact, the mangrove swamps are taking the brunt of the waves coming in from the ocean. Those places that had removed them were hit more with erosion and more flooding. So due to an increasing human population, increasing resource consumption, again, just because there's more people doesn't mean that resources are being consumed more. It really comes down to culturally or where you are in the world. Different places, different countries consume more resources than other countries, even if one may have a larger population than the other. So some ecosystem services are improving, but usually at the cost of others. So while we're gaining in one, that means that it's actually hurting another at the same time. There's no balance restored. Food production is probably the most important. Food production has increased exponentially. We grow more food than more than enough food to feed the entire world, but again, people don't have access to the food due to various socio-political and economic factors. So it's disrupted by many natural ecosystems and ecosystem services, and we produce many new variety of crops, including they need irrigation systems. We need to increase production of synthetic fertilizers, providing nitrogen and phosphorus. All these are going to be using fossil fuels, which then again releases more carbon into the atmosphere and also disrupts the natural flow of different cycles, like the nitrogen and carbon cycles. Now, agriculture involves clearing out natural areas to grow crops, meaning we're going from polyculture, where there's many different plants, to monoculture, meaning we're just growing one type of plant, usually in the field. So less carbon is being locked up in the crops compared to natural plant biomass. So when we grow a whole field of corn, it doesn't compare to the amount of carbon that was absorbed when that once was a forest or some other ecosystem. So more carbon dioxide thus will go into the atmosphere, increasing the effects of the greenhouse effect. Fish and shellfish production has also been heavily impacted. Two main sources of this, capturing wild species from the ocean and farming of fish, shellfish, and seaweed. There are aquaculture farms that exist in usually large netted areas off the coast of different places throughout the world, and they are having a huge ecological impact in those areas. So it's increasing technology has allowed us to catch more fish deeper, more than ever before. and has driven many fish populations to near extinction, if not already there. So because we're better at catching fish, we're catching more, and there's increasing demand for fish. Places that couldn't get fish regularly now can. You pretty much go anywhere in the country and have fish, even if that fish is not indigenous to that area or you're not anywhere near the ocean. Um, by introducing regulations to these different places, it allows for a more long-term sustainable harvest of these fish. Unfortunately, not everywhere in the world has different regulations. And the growth of aquaculture has also resulted in a loss of natural coastal habitats. Here's an example of aquaculture. We can see these various nets that are here, all linked together, and they're being monitored, and there's fish that live inside of them, and then when it's time to harvest, they bring the nets up. Let's say this is salmon, harvest them from there, and then put the net back down, start the next population. Now, water availability is something we've been talking about a lot this year too. So a supply of fresh water for humans has increased globally over the past 50 years, and it can vary by region. North Africa, Middle East, Mexico, and American West are experiencing a large amount of water loss because water is being used faster than it's being replenished because there's a larger growing population. And also not just growing populations, what we're using it for, more lawns, more golf courses, these larger scale unsustainable agricultural practices, all depleting the water at a faster rate than it can replenish. So increasing agriculture affects this, and we've been trying to address this since the Dust Bowl, and the Great Depression. But unfortunately, people haven't really stuck to those practices. A famous example is Lake Mead. It is going to its amount of water has greatly diminished since the 1930s, leading to due to increased drought, higher temperatures, increased water consumption. And it supplies water to 40 million people across 4 states and serves as generate electricity for the region. 2001, water emergency was declared and continues basically to this day. Lake Mead only held about 35% of what it did in the 1930s, forcing these states to reduce water consumption. They were given the opportunity to decide on a state level what to do and coordinate together, but unfortunately no agreement has been reached yet as of recording this video. And the federal government is probably going to have to step in and try and regulate this to get the water levels back up. As far as what it's going to look like, I don't know as of yet. So it's continuously approaching a dead pool status. A dead pool is where the amount of water stored in the reservoir is so low that it can no longer flow downstream. And you can see here being depleted over time. Pollination services, we had talked about this a little earlier. Bats, birds, and insects are all different pollinators that exist naturally in different ecosystems, and they help with the reproduction of these plants. So they not only give us fruit, but they also are going to help various industries, agricultural, including food production, as well as nurseries, growing flowers, and things like that for sale as well. Without them helping, there'd be a huge loss of biodiversity, and there's a loss in plants. That means there's a loss in bees. Bee populations have been on the decline. CCD, colony collapse disorder, has been a huge problem for years. It's due to three main things: loss of habitat, pesticides, parasites, all these different things combining together to have a huge impact on these bee populations. And if there's a loss of habitat for wild plants, that means that their food sources are beginning to dwindle as well. And that affects not only bees, but larger mammals such as bears and deer. They begin to go into the suburbs and things like that, which can have a huge impact on various human populations.